Hi everyone, hope we're doing alright. Today is a very highly requested video on how I make my filet crochet tops. Just under a year ago, I made this filet crochet top which had a graphic of a rib cage on it. You guys really enjoyed it and I did promise you a tutorial, but I did say that it would be some time before I made another version. Just because filet crochet is quite a big undertaking, especially if you use a smaller hook size. But I figured now would be a really good time to make a second version and teach you guys how I make them. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a filet crochet top with sleeves to make more of a t-shirt, but I'll also be demonstrating how you can use the same technique to create a vest, which is a very similar technique that I used to create my original ribcage vest. I'm going to get straight into the video just because this is going to be a longer video. In order to make this top, you kind of need to have a grip of two things. Obviously, the first one is filet crochet. You should have kind of a basic knowledge of filet crochet. In the case of this top, I'm going to be using a double crochet chain 2. I've got a tutorial on that kind of filet crochet, which I will leave linked in the description below. And then you also need to know about raglan design, which is basically where you start off with the circumference of your collar and then you pick 4 increase points. These 4 increase points separate the circumference of your piece into a front panel, a back panel, and 2 side panels. You then grow these panels at the same rate and eventually you will join your front and back panel to make the circumference of your body, and your side panel is going to be left just either side of your collar, or this is where you're going to cast on your sleeves. This shouldn't be your first filet crochet project, but potentially if you already are quite comfortable with filet crochet, this could be your first raglan project. But I would only do that if you're a confident crocheter. I do have a few videos kind of talking through how I build my raglan designs, as well as how I kind of fit the measurements for a raglan design. I will leave those linked in the description as well. As for the actual materials that you're going to need, first we'll just start off with the yarn and hook size. I personally use mercerized cotton, and this one is from a brand called Yeoman Yarns. This mercerized cotton is a little bit thicker than the thread cotton that you kind of find for filet crochet. I would suggest that unless you're extremely experienced and you want a really long-term project, that you don't go for a thread count that's too small. This is definitely a yarn I gravitate quite heavily towards when I'm filet crocheting, just because it is quite nice size for me. And I do have thinner thread, but especially while making a bigger piece like a shirt, something like this is really good. For my vest, I probably used around 250 grams, and for the t-shirt, I used around 350 grams. This is very heavily going to depend on the size that you make, as well as the type of yarn that you use. In theory, you can use a lot of different types of yarn, but most filet crochet projects that you see will use this kind of mercerized cotton. This makes your stitches nice and clear, so your graphic is nice and visible. When it comes to selecting your hook size, I would keep your hook size on the smaller end. So for me, I'm using a 2mm hook. As we're making a garment, when we pick our hook, we don't want to pick the smallest hook that we possibly can, like a lot of people would do with filet crochet. That could lead to a vest that is a little bit stiff. So definitely pick a small hook size, but don't go too crazy with it. Then on top of that, you're going to need a needle and some scissors. And then finally, you want to pick out a pixel grid that you want to use. You can either design your own, which I like to use Stitch Fiddle for that, or you can find them online, which both of the pixel grids that I'll be using today are available on my Etsy. You can use whichever pixel grid you would like. I would just use your yarn and hook size to do a little bit of a gauge swatch and kind of guesstimate how big this graphic would end up, just so when you add your graphic, you're not having a surprise where it turns out really small or your graphic is too big to fit on your shirt. If you want your pixel grid to be centered in your front panel, you want to make sure that your front panel is an odd or an even number, which would make a matching pair with your pixel grid. That's going to be it for materials. Let's go into the construction of our vest. So I've just started off the filet crochet top, and when I'm working with filet crochet, instead of worrying about the amount of stitches, I kind of worry about the amount of mesh boxes, which are kind of the gaps that are created by the mesh stitch. But basically you want to start with a chain length that can fit around your head that has a multiple of 6. And I say that because basically we need to split the amount of mesh boxes in between 4 areas, which is the front and back panel and the 2 side panels. And my repeat is a double crochet chain 2. So for everything to kind of work, obviously it has to be a multiple of 3, but because my front and side panel needs to have the same amount of stitches as my back and side panel, it also needs to be able to be divided by 2. So a multiple of 6 divided by 2 will always be a multiple of 3. So I started off with 150 chains and then I slip stitched into my first chain. This is the point where you can start to add your increases. Now I have a video based solely on how to place your increases to inform a certain size. But the long story short is the difference between your side and front panel needs to be apparent when you first start your piece, because you're increasing these panels at the same rate throughout the whole process of the raglan design. If you want to know more about this, I would go ahead and check out that video because this video is already going to be quite long. So how I split up my increases is I had 150 chain stitches, which would equal 50 mesh boxes. So that's 50 mesh boxes that I need to divide between the 2 side panels and the front and back panel. I make this easy for myself just by splitting this in half. So I have 25 stitches to split between 1 side panel and the front or the back panel. I decided on doing 5 stitches on the side panel and 20 on the front and back panel. We've kind of got all of those maths things out of the way. We're ready to actually start crocheting. I've already started my first row, but this is where I slip stitched, and basically you want this seam, which is going to be where our turning chains are, to be in the middle of the back panel. If we remember, the back panel is 20, so I split this in half and get 10. And what I would do is I would start by creating 10 mesh boxes. Before then, chaining 2 and doing a double crochet into the same stitch, then doing 5. Same thing, chain 2, double crochet into the stitch. Obviously these are going to be our increases. So this is our side panel. We then have 20 stitches for our front panel. And wait, I need to continue this. So I have created those 5 mesh boxes. I am now ready to chain 2 and do my double crochet into the same stitch. So I've reached those 5 mesh boxes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can now chain 2 and do my double crochet into that same stitch. I should have room to do a total of 10 mesh boxes here. So I've come to the end of my round. I'm now going to slip stitch into the second turning chain of 4. And it's this point that you can just go ahead and make sure that you're happy with not only how many stitches are where, but also with your measurements. As I said earlier, your front panel measurement and your side panel measurement, the difference between those is going to stay the same this whole time. So make sure you are happy with that before you move on. So with these increases, that's kind of the first row, but it's a 2-row repeat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by chaining 4 to start off my new row, turn my work, and we're going to continue with those mesh stitches all the way up until I reach my increase. So I've now got to my increase stitch. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do my double crochet like I normally would. Then I will chain 2 and work a double crochet around this chain 2 right here. Like so. Then I can chain 2 and work my double crochet into this stitch here. And then for my next row, this is going to be my center stitch. So I would work in a double crochet, chain 2, double crochet. So if we think about it, at each increase point in the row, I am increasing by 1 double crochet and 2 chains. I'm going to go ahead and work on this for a little bit using that 2-row increase up until I get the size that I want. And I will update you guys ready for the next step. I've just got to the point where I want to start adding my graphic, and because my graphic is off center, I can just kind of pick whereabouts I want the graphic to be. If you have a graphic that you do want to center though, you want to make sure that your front or back panel or wherever you're putting the graphic is either an even or an odd number, and obviously you want that to coincide with the pixel grid that you're using. As I say, for me, I do not need to center mine, so I didn't need to worry about that. I found a graphic with a width of 20, and as you can see, I've just marked out 20 boxes for me to kind of do the pattern within. And obviously this is going to be a little bit harder just because I am doing my increases at the same time as I'm doing my filet crochet. But to be honest, I've only got a few more rows that I'll need to do increases before I then separate off the front and back panel. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna work up till that point. Honestly, I'm not gonna talk too much about actually adding in filet crochet, just because I do have a fair few videos on that technique. Right, that is enough blabbing from me. I will update you guys once I'm ready to attach the back and the front. So I will see you guys then. Hi guys, so I have just finished the kind of increase portion of my raglan, which I've heard this being referred to as a yoke, but that's normally when it's kind of more circular, so I don't know if that applies to this. I'm pretty sure it doesn't, but maybe it does. But I'm ready to connect the front and back panel. If you want to make this top but in more of a vest version, what you would do is you would start the same way. Once the width of your front or back panel is the length that you want, you would just cast on normal rows and just continue down up until you reach the point around 2 inches underneath your armpit, which obviously, remember, your project will be blocked and stretched out a little bit more, so maybe aim more for like 1.5 inches. But I'll show you guys kind of where, oh, there's a hair. Oh my god, there's so much hair in this. I'll show you guys where I'm at with the fit of this project, just so you guys can use this as a guide to where you want to end your increases. This is what it looks like on. As I say, you want your piece to be hitting around 1 inch underneath your armpit. And whilst you're trying this on, what I would do is kind of take note of the distance between the front and back panel around the side of your body. Because I'm happy with my measurements and where everything is hitting, I'm ready to start joining my front and back panel, which I'll show you guys how to do now. So I have kind of already started this row in the back. You're going to start your row as usual and work all the way up until this increase. Once you get to your increase, what you want to do is chain a multiple of 3 plus 2, and this should roughly be the length in between the front and back panel when you just tried it on. I've done a total of 20 chains because 3 times 6 is 18 plus 2, that's 20. This is our side panel, and remember we've just come from our back panel. So we're skipping this whole side panel and working our next stitch into this increase on the other side. And you have a little bit of leeway as to how you treat these increases. For me, I just do 1 stitch within them like so. But if you wanted to, you could still do the 2 stitches into here to kind of follow that pattern of an increase. Really, it doesn't matter how you do this, as long as you do it the same on all 4 increases. I am now going to work this all the way along my front panel up until I reach the other side, and then I'm going to mirror what I've done here on that side. So I've just worked my way all around the round. I'm going to slip stitch into the second chain of my turning chain, and now we can see that this is going to be the circumference of the body of our shirt, and this is the circumference of our sleeves. So at this point, again, I would try this on just to double check that you're happy with everything. I've decided not to do any decreases, but if you do want to do decreases, my suggestion would be that you mark 2 points in the front panel that are symmetrical to each other, and then find mirroring points in the back, and whilst you're doing your decreases, I would move these pairs towards each other, because I just think that looks a little bit nicer. And how you would do these decreases is you would turn a double crochet chain 2 in your decrease spot into a double crochet chain 1. Then to decrease again, you would go into a double crochet, skip the chains altogether, and just do your next double crochet before you then combine these 2 double crochets into 1 double crochet. With decreases like this, I'd really kind of focus on the whole trying it on as you go thing, and try it on as you're doing your decreases. Therefore, you'll have a better understanding of how much you actually need to decrease by. I am almost done with the body portion of the shirt, and I'm ready to show you guys what it looks like. I'm 1 row off of finishing my graphic, but I do still have some more that I need to crochet just to get the total length that I want. Let me try it on for you guys just so you can see what it's looking like. Right now it's kind of hitting like at the top of my hip, but I think for this piece I want to go with kind of a longer body, so I reckon I'm going to go till around here. What I'm going to do is I'll finish off my graphic and crochet, I'm going to say probably like 7 to 10 more rows, and I've thought about if I want to do kind of like a lace trimming to this. Even if I don't do anything too complex, I do want to add some form of border to make sure that the bottom doesn't flare out. I'm gonna figure that out today. So what I'm gonna do is I'll finish off the body of this jumper, and I'll come back to you guys once I'm ready to add the sleeves, just so I can show you guys how I'm gonna do that. I reckon my final few rows will only take me like 2 to 3 hours, but I don't know if I'm being optimistic. I will see you guys when I'm ready to add my sleeve. I have done 6 rows past my graphic grid. Let me just finish my final row, and obviously at this point you can customize what kind of edging you want to do. This is what the edging ended up looking like. My final step of the major construction is to do the sleeves, so let's go ahead and do them now. First step is we want to make sure that this is facing the right way, just to continue the pattern of going back and forth with our stitches, because obviously we turn in between each row. You want to make sure you start your first row in the direction to continue that pattern. So I know that this is facing the right way. What I'm gonna do is find a midpoint in this point of the sleeve. So that's kind of this bottom bit here. And if we actually look, my middle stitch would be one of these 2 chains here. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pick the double crochet that's closer to the back, and I will do the same on the other side. As I say, with a lot of these things, it's not necessarily about doing them so much as making sure whatever you do on one side, you mirror on the other. I'm gonna enter my hook through that stitch, and I'm going through the 1 loop that's left out after I did the double crochets into the chain length whilst I started to build up this part of the panel. Now I am going to start off with a slip knot, and I am going to pull my slip knot through the stitch, and I might as well just bring this tail through to make it a little bit easier, and then I'll do a slip stitch like this. And what I actually do is I grab the back end of this loop, or kind of like the bit that controls the loop underneath it, and pull it really tight to almost make a knot, and this is how I secure my yarn when I add a new section in my pieces. And I like using this method good just because it's nice and secure and your chains aren't really going to tighten or change. But this knot is pretty discreet. So I've attached my yarn. I'm now going to start by chaining 4, and I am going to continue the stitch pattern of skipping 2 chain stitches and doing my double crochet. Just like before, we're working underneath the loop that we didn't already work in whilst we already put double crochets into the other side of the stitch. Now I have this corner situation that kind of goes into the main row of the raglan that we were building, and it's just like the rest of the pattern where you want to be mirroring what you do to one section to all of the symmetrical or similar sections. I'm going to keep it simple and add a chain 2 double crochet here, then a chain 2 double crochet here before I then work into my row. So I will chain 2 and then I'll find this spot right here to work a double crochet into, chain 2, then I am going to find this section right here, then chain 2, and I'm on like the side panel section of my raglan, and this is what I mean where the stitches are facing me in the direction that I would work in if I was switching sides each row, and that's just going to make the joining of this row more seamless. I'm now going to continue round this round. I've worked my way around the other side and I need to put 1 double crochet into this stitch here, chain 2, and then I put my other one in this hole right here, and I'm just going to double check that that looks all right, and yeah, that's nice and symmetrical, so I can continue on with my pattern. I'm now going to slip stitch into the second turning chain, and now we're going to continue the rows the same way, where I'm going to start off by chaining 4, turning my work and working in the round, just doing double crochet, chain 2, skip 2. And if you want to do decreases whilst building up these sleeves, my recommendation would be to do it at the start or the end of each row, kind of whichever one makes more sense for you. But just for me, I'm going to build this up like a cylinder, so I won't be decreasing any stitches. And obviously, just like with the rest of this project, you just want to build up rows and keep on trying it on till you've reached the length that you're happy with. But obviously remember that this is still going to be treated either by blocking or steaming, kind of depending on your preference. The sizing may become a little bit bigger, so account for that. I've now tried this on and I'm happy with the length of sleeve that I've done, which as you can see isn't very many rows at all. So I'm just going to go ahead and do my trimming, and I'm going to show you guys how I do it. First, let me finish off this row by slip stitching into the second stitch of the turning chain. Now I'm going to turn my work so I'm facing the other direction. As I mentioned earlier, this is a point that you can customize what kind of edging you want, whether you want something more basic like what I'm doing or whether you want something like a lace edging. I've worked 2 single crochets into each one of these spaces and I've worked my way all the way around, so I'm going to slip stitch into the first single crochet that I did of this row. If you want to chain 1, you can go ahead and do that, but for me, I am just going to turn my work and then do 1 single crochet into each one of the stitches in the row below. Now I'm going to slip stitch into the first single crochet of the row, then I'm going to cut my yarn and pull that through the loop, and that is how I finish off my sleeves. But I did want to quickly show you how I sew in my ends, just because especially if you're using mercerized cotton, this is actually a harder step than it would be with any other material, just because to make this really secure, because of how tightly wound it is, it can be quite difficult. We want to start by selecting a needle, and actually I would go for something like this one where it's quite thin. And you want a thin needle just because while we sew in our ends, we are going to aim to go through the yarn rather than just through the loops of our stitches, just to make everything more secure. As you can see, the thickness of the needle is not too different from the thickness of the yarn. And obviously you do want to make sure that your yarn is still thinner than your needle, but this is going to be what makes everything more secure. My bad side is facing me, which is what you want to happen. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass this thread through down to here and sew in my end in this part of the stitch here. I just want to carry this yarn through, and that looks pretty good to me. So this is my first stage of sewing in my ends, where I'm just kind of following down the stitch through any loop that I can put my needle through. At this point, we don't need to worry about going through the yarn. So now I'm ready to change my direction. So you want to enter your needle in a different place from where your yarn is coming out of, or else you'll kind of undo the progress that you've already done. And this is the point where you kind of want to go as randomly through everything as possible, but keeping as much yarn as you can on your bad side. I can already feel that that's kind of knotted in itself a little bit, so it's more secure than if I was just kind of like weaving in my ends. I'm now going to change directions again, making sure that I'm entering my needle not in the same space where my yarn is coming out of. And I'm just trying to get my needle through as many different points as possible before pulling it through. And the only downside to this method is, well, it's a little bit harder to do, but it also can get a little bit messier. But as this is our bad side, when we go on our good side, we really won't be able to tell what's gone on. So yeah, it's going to be a little bit less neat, but this is going to last a lot longer, and it will take a lot more for it to be able to become undone. Now, I pass my needle back and forth 4 times total, so back and forth, and for me this feels quite sturdy, and this is a little bit tighter than the rest of the stitches, as you can kind of see, but that's going to loosen up once you block your project. I'm going to cut my yarn pretty close to the piece and kind of just like stretch out where I've sewn in my end, just to make sure this is nice and secure. You just want to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side, sew in all of your ends. You could also add some form of trim around the collar, but for me, I'm going to keep this pretty clear. I have just taken my piece off of the blocking boards. You guys know, normally I will just throw on whatever I've made on whatever I'm wearing at the moment. But I kind of want to make an effort to stop doing that, so I've decided that I'm not just going to try this top on, I'm also going to try and find an outfit that works. And I started off with this tight turtleneck with short vibe. This would have been cute if I would have started off with a collar, but I don't really think that it's the vibe. Also, these shorts are quite low-waisted, and I don't think that kind of division looks good with an outfit like this. But with filet crochet tops like this, having something darker on underneath does make the graphic pop more. Or to be fair, just even not having anything on underneath. I'm gonna keep on looking and try and find something that I like the look of. Right, this is the second outfit, and I'm feeling this one so much more. I've literally just layered this piece with a t-shirt underneath, just a plain black one. Then I've gone with dark denim and these grey and black shoes. And for accessories, I have this little leather satchel, as well as a necklace from my grandma and a little ring. Not gonna lie, I'm really happy with how this t-shirt has turned out. I'm definitely gonna get a lot of wear out of it. I think I actually prefer this one over the rib cage, just because, well, I think it could be because this is newer, so I almost have more ideas as to what I want to do with this. But let me know in the comments below which one is your favourite. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and I look forward to seeing what you guys create. Make sure you like, comment and subscribe. If you have any suggestions for video ideas in the future, please let me know. Go ahead and check out my patterns on Etsy and Ravelry, and follow my other social media, which is always linked in the description below. Have a good rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.